Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 82 of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. After having a set of serious interviews and piece of immigration information that I've gone through in the last couple of episodes, this time I thought I'd make it more fun and friendly by having an interview with comedian, writer, podcaster, and immigrant Maeve Higgins. You may know Maeve from her Maeve in America podcast and the book of the same name, but she also wrote a very nice and interesting New York Times article, an opinion piece entitled God Bless America and Her Immigration Lawyers a few weeks ago, where yours truly was quoted. So I thought it'd be nice to talk with her, get her background, to see what drove her to write such an article and a podcast about immigration and a lot more. Before starting, a few notes. The AILA Central Florida chapter is having a great sports immigration law conference on March 8th in Orlando, Florida. Our colleague Ksenia Myrova and others have done a lot of great work to make this event possible. So if you're in the area in Florida or you practice sports immigration dealing with athletes, it'd be a wonderful place to go and learn more and network and become a better sports-based immigration attorney. Also, in my last episode, I did an interview with former consular officer Christopher Richardson, which is very popular. So I went and took out short clips of top and key information from the 1+ hour interview that I had with them. You can find those on my YouTube page, Immigration Lawyers Channel. And as always, you can find more helpful immigration law info on my website, immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com. Without any further ado, let's get it started. Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am the host, Attorney John Khosravi, and I practice U.S. immigration law exclusively. For more information about the program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note that this recording is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with a licensed attorney for specific legal guidance that suits your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted and written permission is required for rebroadcasting. For more information about me, please visit www.jqqlaw.com. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I have a really cool episode and interview today. It's with Maeve Higgins. Maeve is a great comedian, a great podcaster, a lot of things, great immigrant. So I thought I'd definitely interview her. She's been in the news recently because of a great op-ed she did about immigration attorneys in the New York Times. And in our community, in our listservs, and our email groups and stuff like that, it was an article that was distributed widely and with much thanks. So I thought it'd be great to just talk with her. And I have to say I was quoted in there too, so I was involved in that. I appreciate Maeve talking with me about that. But without further ado, just want to get started, get to know Maeve a little better about the kind of work she does and her perspective on immigration. And she has a great podcast. She pretty much has the top immigration-specific podcasts on iTunes. There's like a BBC one that's maybe above her, but that's not really specific immigration. It's more about news. But if you type in immigration in iTunes, she comes up the number one for like at least the last 3 years, I think, or something like that. So, it's just going strong. So it's definitely a podcast to listen to. We'll talk about that in addition to her other work. So Maeve, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, I'm really glad to be talking to you. As you know, I listen to your show.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a fan. So, no, thanks for having me, John. And we did speak before when I was doing background and also getting quotes for my recent piece in the Times that you mentioned, which was it was kind of like marking the 2-year anniversary of the travel ban, when I think a lot of the work that immigration lawyers do sort of came into the public's view. I think a lot of Americans, if you're born here, you don't really think about immigration lawyers a lot, unless you have, you're from an immigrant family. But it was so weird to me when I first moved here that like people were kind of like, "Oh, you have a lawyer? Like, you need a visa?" I was like, "Oh man, they don't have a clue."
I would say I was born here, and then once I got started in immigration law, like I got a social security number just because I was born here, and then I realized people are like freaking out that they don't have a social security number and a work permit, and the assumption is in the population that you just come here and you can work, but it's not like that. I mean, you can work illegally, but even that's hard because there's requirements where you show work permits sometimes, or some sort of permission, and taxes are an issue. So it's a big headache that people aren't aware of. And your show does a job, helps to really open people's eyes to that reality. I guess just going into that article, you talked about what drove you to write it. What has been the reception since you published the article? It's been about, I don't know, a week and a half now.
So I think what drove me to write it was, I mean, I'm a contributing writer for the Times, so I'm lucky that I can choose what to write about. And I mean, I still have to pitch it, and like last time I pitched it, I turned down.
Mm-hmm.
But I started working on this one a few months back because I heard about this lawyer who had cut her hair.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of her clients, who was a little girl who had been separated from her family during the summer at the southern border, and she had gotten repeated lice infestations in the hostel she was staying in up in East Harlem here in New York. And I heard about this lawyer who had cut her hair kind of in solidarity with her little client who had to eventually have her hair cut. And it was I think my podcast producer told me that of this other podcast I do about breakups. So it was like a weirdly roundabout way of hearing, but it really struck me, and I was like, God, like people don't often think of lawyers as, I mean, in general, like lawyers as kind of contributing positively to the world. But this story really struck me. Anyway, in the end, I ended up, interviewing that lawyer, Lauren Blodgett. She works at Safe Passage Project, and that anecdote didn't make it into the piece, but that was the kind of, I just think as a storyteller, I think it's a really effective, like, little vignette of, just an insight into somebody's life, that somebody would actually care that much. Mm-hmm. And I think immigration lawyers have that inside track on immigration that like most citizens don't have. And even as an immigrant myself, I kind of just know about my own story, my own visa, my own process, and maybe like my friends. But it's such a crazy world, as you know, and then everything has been sped up in the past few years too. So I knew that it would make an interesting piece. I just had trouble getting it accepted until then finally my editor said, oh, look, it's the 2-year anniversary of the travel ban. And another lawyer I had interviewed, Mark Doss, happened to be the, he was Harmeed Darwesh's lawyer, who was the first, I should text it. But Mark Doss works for IRAP, and he was, his client was one of the first to be detained and the first to be released. So there was some relevance to the news cycle there. So, and the reaction to that story has been largely positive. I mean, you'll always get some trolls online who like don't read it properly. And whenever I really write anything about immigration, there's always going to be a sort of a bank of people who say they should come here legally, whether or not I'm talking about legal or illegal immigration or undocumented people that are already here, or like whatever I'm talking about when I talk about immigration. A knee-jerk response is always going to be, they need to come here legally. When in this case, it was like, well, what the government was doing was actually illegal. So, there was the usual bits of blowback, but also there was a lot of, positive response from, I heard from a few lawyers who were like retired lawyers who had then gone back to kind of volunteer, and I heard from a few immigrant rights advocates who were kind of saying, oh, thanks for highlighting the good work that these people do. And then my favorite thing is I just heard from people who were like, whoa, I never thought about this before. And like, I never knew like that this was a relationship that was so important to so many immigrants. And like, that's kind of the sweet spot for me, is to kind of make people understand a little bit more about what the immigrant experience is like.
Wonderful. So let's talk a little about your background to a certain extent. I don't want to go into all the legal details, although everything is by the book with you. So you're, as you could probably tell, you're originally from Ireland?
I'm from Texas. I'm Irish. I'm Irish, and I lived in the UK for a year, and then I moved here to New York 5 years ago. And I came initially on a T3 visa, which was because I was asked to take part in the Kansas City Irish Festival, which happens every year in Kansas. there's a huge Irish American community there, and they kind of like dyed the fountains green, and they had comedians and musicians, and they secured me a year-long visa. So I kind of thought, oh, like I'll do some other, like the visa allowed me to work for a year, so I thought I'll do some other jobs, and then I got an O1 visa, which is a funny process. I don't think you do those visas,
No, I
John,
don't
but
do P's and O's. No.
yeah, the O is really like, it's funny. It was funny for me to get because you basically have to, prove that you're this, that you have extraordinary abilities. And like as an Irish person and like maybe like as a woman, like I grew up Catholic, I'm not good at boasting about myself, which is like all you need to do to get an O1. You just have to like tell everyone how great you are and like ask for favors and use all of these insane adjectives that are like what a total genius you are. And I would say like that I definitely qualify for one, but just that that process was like, it was mortifying. And I love talking about this with other immigrants who've come here in way more difficult ways because they just love to like torment me about how easy that is. Like when they're like, oh, Maeve, that was your struggle. Like, you're modest. That's what was hard for you. Where they're like, I was an asylum seeker and I came here because like my family were, kicked out of the country or whatever. People, as you know, have, horrifying reasons for needing to move to the US, or they're just economic migrants, and it's all valid. But in my case, my little struggle was, having to tell everyone how great I was.
But it is kind of nerve-wracking when you do an O because you don't know how they're going to interpret your success. It's so subjective. And so you're like, you paid all this money, you're waiting there, like your life may go this direction or may go the other direction at the whim of a person you're never going to see in some other location in the world. So it's pretty stressful still. I mean, obviously, being go through asylum is some other hell to go through, but it's a lot. I mean, it's your future, what's going to happen, and what you're going to do, to support yourself and everything. So, how was the P? Was the P a lot of paperwork too, or a lot of stuff, or was it the O much more than that?
Oh, the O was way more involved, I think, because, well, for one thing, with the P visa, the organization that brought me over handled it all, really. But the O was like, I had to gather all the evidence myself. And
you kind of feel like you're doing most of the work. You're like, what's this attorney doing? I'm gathering all these paperwork. It's a really involved process.
No way. I love my attorney, Amanda. No, she was just invaluable because, like you mentioned, the subjectivity of it is kind of terrifying. So, like, I would say to Amanda, who is my attorney, I'd be like, well, this is really good. I got to do this show in Ireland that's, like, really prestigious. And she's like, well, actually, there's no way of proving that felt like a big deal to you, but actually this other thing, is documented and is, like, it's kind of hard to be subjective when it's yourself. So I think definitely, a good lawyer comes in there. And also just because, like, especially these days, and so far the evidence I have is certainly anecdotal, but I think that they're really, even at the interview stage now where you think you've got your visa, they can still come up with questions and they can still prevent you from, actually getting it.
Yeah.
So there's lots of, I always advise people, like, it's so tempting to try and save the money, especially when you're talking to artists. Like, so many of us are like broke and, kind of bad at paperwork, and like, just try and do everything you can do to like get the money for a reliable lawyer, because like you said, it is your future. If you do want to move here and do it the right way, it's like you need an ally, definitely, in your corner. I heard recently about, a performer who, had been, I know you're not approved until you do the interview, but, usually the interview is kind of a last step, right? But they were, a singer, and those interviews are they're hard. Like, you go in, it's a very quiet room, everyone's really nervous, like you don't have your phone or anything. It's a really intense experience, and you kind of line up, and you're looking at this official through this glass window, certainly at the embassy in Dublin, and they can kind of ask you anything. And one of the performers I heard about recently, who's a singer, was told to sing a song. In standing there in the embassy, having submitted all their evidence and been approved up to that point, like clearly, you know, a real singer, and it was like, okay, sing a song for us. I was like, oh my God. It made me think about, like, I don't know, like a king at court, like commanding a jester to do something. And it also made me think about, like, oh man, like, yes, I'm a comedian, but whenever I like get into a taxi and end up, you know, talking about what I do, it always goes badly. Like the driver's like, oh, tell us a joke. I'm like, uh-oh. You can never think of one. So that was like a scary thing that I've been hearing a bit more and more of, just like the challenges that come up that like you wouldn't expect, you know?
Yeah, especially for jokes. It's like, okay, your comedian tells a joke. It's kind of like offensive to, if you, I guess the measure of a singer is like, sing for us, a dance for us. It is kind of offensive if it's been accepted. I interviewed yesterday a former consular officer, which I'm going to be publishing that interview as well. And, you know, he just talks about like anything goes at the embassy. They have supreme right. There's pretty much God there. And they have this thing called consular non-reviewability. So it's very difficult to overcome anything a consular officer says. So you kind of have to go there and just smile, and it's kind of like going to the bank with those windows. Like you're going to, and they can ask you anything. So it'd be super private stuff that's like everyone's listening, and it's such an awkward experience.
Yeah.
And he was telling me, like, you know, they'll on average go through 120, some posts are really busy, 160 interviews a day. So they're kind of like,
oh my God.
Yeah, it's like, how do you go through that many people in their lives? And it's like, it's crazy that the system's designed the way it is. And it leads to problems happening. Even if they're trying to do their best, problems are going to happen when you have that number of people coming in on a daily basis. Just human beings aren't really capable of handling that, especially because they have to look for lying and fraud. And it's like, you can always look at people and judge them and think they're lying. It's like there's no, so it's just such a difficult thing to be able to go through. So, okay, so you got the visa, you came here. How's life in the U.S.? Has the O visa brought the opportunities you thought it would?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, it's a good visa to have because you're not beholden to one employer. So as you know, I'm a freelancer, so it's really useful for me to be able to do that. And you know, it's also just being here in the US has been so good for my career. Like I was, you know, doing well in Ireland and, you know, working there for the first like 6 years of my career, and everything was going great. And then there was the economic crash, which didn't like fully wipe me out or anything, but it definitely like there was way less money like slashing around to make TV shows or, you know, to just like book a national tour where you could be sure that like thousands of people would come out and spend like $50 on a ticket. So, but there's just the scale of America too. Like there's like the population of Ireland is 4 million, you know. It's like that's like I live in Brooklyn now, and Brooklyn has like 2.5 million or something. So it's just there's way more opportunities here, especially for entertainment, you know. So much stuff gets made here, and like as a writer too, I always had kind of a romantic idea of like living in America, living in New York, and being a writer, and that's happened. Like that's come true for me. So you know, while I definitely have so many criticisms of things here, I also like I moved here for a reason. Like I absolutely love it, and I've met the best people, you know, friend wise, career wise, everything, you know, of my life here. So it's a funny one, isn't it, when like you kind of feel like ungrateful sometimes.
Now, so you've made the most of it. Really, like how active you are is amazing. You have several podcasts. The one that I know you particularly from is the Maeve in America podcast, which has a book to it. People can get it on Amazon. Great book. How did you think about that podcast? And do you have any memorable moments from the podcast that really stood out? Any interviews that stood out?
Oh yeah, so many. So I started to do that podcast. I mean, we started developing it in 2015. And so at that stage, I had lived here for like 3 years, and I just had this question thrumming the whole time, which was like, why me? Like, why was I allowed in? And like, why not them? And like, how different my immigrant experience was to other immigrants that I met.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just so curious about it, honestly. And it also, like, as you know, it ties into so many other like facets of American life, like obviously politics and race and, you know, what's valued and what isn't valued. And then I also just found myself, maybe it's living here in New York where like almost half the population is like born outside of America. But also just as someone who is really drawn to good stories, like the people with the best stories that I spoke to were always immigrants. And I feel like immigration lawyers will be really used to this. Like the people you come across in your daily work are often, they have like a better story than someone who's just like born here and grows up here, because by nature of being immigrants, they have left one life behind and they're starting a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And like immediately that's like intriguing to me. Some people more so than others, obviously, but so I knew that there was this whole like bank of interesting stories that like crossed loads of different categories. And also, like, as a comedian, you know, comedy podcasts are just huge, and there's a boom going on, and it had been going on for years at that stage. And I've been approached lots of times about, like, do they want to do a podcast about this? Do they want to do a podcast about that? But then myself and my producer started to work up this idea that was basically every week I'd meet an immigrant and hear their immigration story, and then also give context to their story. So that would be, you know, I guess one interesting, I mean, loads of the episodes like stay with me.
Mm-hmm.
We did a Valentine's Day special where we didn't focus on one person. We rather did like a whole kind of love and immigration special, where Mona Chalabi, who's actually, she's an immigrant from England. She worked on the podcast as like our data person,
Mm-hmm.
but we sent her on an actual date. Cause like, I think it's interesting when immigrants date, because like there's obviously, for some people in the background, there's like, well, if I'm dating an American, they could get me citizenship if you end up getting married to them. Mm-hmm. So like there's like a weird little power imbalance.
Yeah.
Like whether or not you want that, it's there. And then also, you know, specifically Mona is, you know, she's English, but her parents are Iraqi, and she went on a date with this guy who was a white American guy, and the kind of culture clash that happened even just over a drink was like so fascinating. Like it was a bad experience for them actually, but it was made great radio. Another, I guess, I met this woman, Roz, who's like, I still don't know what age she is, because she's not sure what age she is, because when she moved from China, she changed her age to make it seem like she was older so she could get in. And she's like in her 90s now, sort of a wealthy retiree living in San Mateo in California. And I went to hang out with her, and she was like a fabulous character with this like huge backstory of all of this kind of, she was an activist. She still is really, like I was there with her taping when they were talking about some local elections in California, and she was kind of like haranguing a group of Chinese seniors about how they should vote. So I think about her a lot, and also another one of my guests, Mohammed Vaza, he's a Syrian asylum seeker, and the thing about him is we spoke like before Syrians were banned, and mm-hmm. the thing that I loved chatting with Vaza was he goes by Vaza because like there was like 50 Mohammeds in his school. So was like he really reminded me of like my uncle. Like there was nothing like, yes, he's Syrian, and like yes, he lived through the revolution, and like he can't go back, and there's all of that drama in his life. But also, like, he just wants to quit smoking. Like, he was finding it really hard to quit smoking. And he has like a 2-year-old boy, and he's like adores him, and he's just like a dad and a guy. And I mean, this stuff really should go without saying, I think. But sadly, I don't think it does. Like, I think people are like, Syrians. I mean, Syrians are banned from America right now. So what's that say?
Yeah.
Like that they're just not seen as equal or as human as the rest of us. And
Blanket,
then
you
when
can't
you
trust them,
actually
yeah.
meet Zaza, like, so I don't know. That's what I liked about the podcast, was it was just very like, I think it was good stories, but it was also just kind of human.
So this is kind of probably a silly question, but because it's from your accent, it's obvious where you're from. Do you get a typical response when you say something that people immediately say, like a joke or something, that because of your knowing you're from Ireland? Is there a typical thing you hear?
Yeah, I mean, like, I would say not, it's not that remarkable. Like, certainly not everyone who meets me says something, but the alcohol thing comes up again and again. Like, I mean, it's like kind of amazing. Like, I did this show a couple of weeks ago, like a comedy show, and the girl said, the host was like, "Oh, here's a drink token." And I said, "Oh, I'm okay." Just because, like, that night I didn't feel like drinking. Like, I drink or whatever. She was like, "What? You're refusing a drink token? Oh my! I thought you snapped it out of my hand."
Oh
And I was
man.
like, "Jeez." I was like, "Well, if you want to know, actually, alcoholism does run in my family." But thanks for the reminder.
I guess that's a form of racism, like for Russians too. As soon as someone's a Russian, they're like, "Oh, vodka." That's all. It's just assuming everyone is like that. I have a client who works on a cruise ship, and whenever he tells somebody, he tries not to tell them, because as soon as he says, "I'm a cruise coordinator for the fun events," people will immediately start talking about their history with cruises and the best time they had on a cruise, and they'll go on and on. He's like, "Dude, I'm sorry, I gotta go. Like, leave me alone."
Right. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Like, these kind of points of connection that people, find. And like, it's just, another thing that happens with me when people hear my Irish accent, they say like, "I'm Irish too." And then they tell me about their great grandmother who, came from Donegal, or,
Yeah.
and it used to really bother me. Like, I was like, this is tedious. But now, having been away like for 5 years, which isn't long, but the more I'm away, the more I get it. Like, and also I think that, like, there's this funny thing that happens in America, right, where like you assimilate, but you also hold on to your own, history and culture, and like, so I find it a bit more interesting now when people come out with that one. But it's the alcohol one still, like, kind of baffles me.
Like, I see that with Italians, like I'm in LA, but a lot of New York's, like, they're like 10th generation Italian almost, and they start talking with the accent when they talk about being Italian stuff, and I'm like, wait a minute, you you haven't been here for, like, I'm sorry, I had a phone ringing in the background, but it's
Okay.
like, yeah, it's like you're not Italian anymore. Why are you talking with the accent? And it's like you just came off the boat or something. But I mean, it's a passion for your heritage. It's good to have that. But I think a lot of it for Italians is like they see mafia movies and they think that's being Italian. My stepdad's from Italy, and so I'm like, it's much more deeper than just mafia movies and like tough guy kind of stuff. It's a bigger thing than that.
Oh, for sure. And also, like, it's funny that it's like the negative things that stay
Yeah.
in people's minds, right? Like, they're like, the Italians are in the mafia and the Irish are like a bunch of drunks.
So now, one thing I was going to bring up at the beginning, but there was a change in title for your article. It went from being, God Bless America and her immigration lawyers, to just her lawyers. And I talked to you about this. Did you get any information on why that was changed? Because it did come up in a couple of forums of like, why it changed and potentially start starting the conspiracy and all that kind of stuff. I thought it'd be a good place to address it.
I'm sorry. I actually emailed my editor to ask her after we spoke, but I didn't hear back. So I don't know. The best I can guess is that happens a lot. Like they play around with the digital headline to like see what gets more hits.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably it. Like, it is interesting to me that the word immigration was taken out because, I mean, even just as like, I don't write headlines myself, but like, I think, saying God bless lawyers, that would make people sit up and be like, what? And like make them more likely to click. But I wonder, and I've run into this with my own work when I was trying to get another season of my podcast, when I was like trying to sell it to somebody else, like there's, I just don't know if people believe that there's an appetite for immigration stories.
Yeah.
Like, I think there is an appetite, and I think, and I know how good the stories are and how important it is for immigrants to have their own voice and their own space on these platforms. But I think with the kind of gatekeepers, there's often a reluctance to believe that and to act on that. But like, this is me like reading a lot into them removing the word immigration. Like, I don't know. But yeah, like, and certainly even in the last couple of years, I see more of a, people are more interested in, like, the big thing, Don, is like, how do you get people to care about something that doesn't affect them? And I think I see more people caring about immigrants now than I did even when I moved here, and even when I was like making that podcast. And I think it's because of all these like big violent actions that like the Trump administration has taken, where like, that, and immigration lawyers know about like how messed up the system is and has been forever, really. But I think, the vast majority of people are just kind of understanding that more recently.
Yeah, one of the things about this kind of like extreme actions, it causes people at least to open their eyes and think about it. So there's a grain of salt, or like there's some sort of saying I was going to say that's about leopard. It's like goes out a pot of gold and a rainbow. There's some sort of phrasing, but sorry to use the pun. But I mean, it caused people more interested.
The pot of gold phrasing. That makes sense to me.
Sorry, I'm being racist. But it has caused people just to be interested in what's going on and care a little more, especially when you see like the violence and the insanity of it. But at the same time, caused people to go into two camps, into extreme camps, and like there is this violence like anti-immigrant group, and it's sometimes people you wouldn't expect and whose life are not affected at all by it, but they kind of like hear it over and over again, and I think it's a tribal sense of wanting to be on this team as opposed to that team. And once you choose your team, that's it. You're going to stick with it, hell or high water. You're not going to change it. This is this human nature that really comes into play in all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it does. And like, I definitely, the more I learn like about America and about our immigration system, it's like the race is such a huge part in it, and like just how racialized the immigration process has always been, and like how the current ban like 3.0 is just another iteration of that.
Yeah.
I think I was pretty naive before, just thinking that like, oh, everybody was always allowed in, and then suddenly they started picking and choosing. But it's like, I learned about the Chinese Exclusion Act, and I learned about, like I just figured it out more. But it actually wasn't easy. Like, I feel like that information isn't widely available. It wasn't until I literally started like researching and talking to people and learning from experts that I was like, this has always been very racialized. And so that's been like a good journey for me, I think.
Yeah, I recorded a podcast which I have to redo because when I was listening to it and editing, it was so boring. I'm like, I have to redo the whole thing because it came too academic. But
Oh,
I was studying the history of immigration and citizenship in the U.S. from like in the 1800s, pre-revolution stuff, and a lot of it comes from English common law and stuff like that. And from England to the
yeah.
initial U.S., like the citizenship test actually excluded Catholics. You had to be a Protestant that took the sacrament within the last 3 months and have a witness to it, or else it's not going to work. And they made some exceptions for
Wow.
Quakers and Jewish people, but like the Catholics were excluded until slowly it came in. And that's, the history with Ireland and the initial, all that stuff plays into the restrictiveness of the racial component and the religious component, which goes way back, 300-400 years ago. But eventually they drop all
Wow.
that kind of stuff. But it was a big part of it. That was like, I was amazed because, I mean, historically, even though, the crown had that issue with, changing from Catholicism to being Protestant, like,
Hmm.
just going back to history of the United Kingdom, it's been a deep divide, religious wise, which does it really transpose with the racial kind of thing there as like being is the Catholic thing really about? I don't know, you can't really judge for 300 years ago what it was, but and right now they probably don't care anymore. But is the divide because like someone has a belief in Catholicism, or is it really just associated with okay, Irish people are maybe Catholic, or like French are Catholic, so we want to be different, and that created the schism to the extent that you know.
Yeah. No, I wonder. I mean, I find the history really fascinating too, and like part of what I struggle with my podcast was like making it interesting,
Hmm.
and making it sound interesting. Like it is interesting, but it's like trying to make it, you know, uh, tie it to the present day and like help people understand like why it's so relevant.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, definitely like the Irish Catholic thing. Sometimes I get annoyed because I feel like it's kind of overstated that like, because basically America was like the United States government was founded on this kind of wafty, set of ideals
Hmm.
that like, oh, Irish people had such a rough time here and, they really suffered and like Irish had to fight their way up and like the Irish did, but it's still Irish people never had it as bad as Native Americans,
Hmm.
enslaved Africans, like,
Yeah.
as Chinese immigrants who they often used to work with on the big, the roads and the
The
bridges,
trains
and
and stuff.
they
Yeah.
Irish, yeah. So I think that I just always want to be careful to not like compare the Irish situation
Yeah.
with like people who were a lot worse off. But at the same time, yeah, certainly Irish people didn't have it as easy as, people coming from England or people from Northern Europe maybe.
Yeah.
And I think that's, probably got a lot to do with the fact that like Ireland was England's very first colony and there's a huge history of oppression from England to Ireland. And surely that was transplanted over here,
Hmm.
just like the whole colonial mindset was. So it's definitely still in play today. I think, when I read about like the stats about the, the white majority will become the minority by, within the next 30 years, and why that's like terrifying to a lot of white people that they're afraid to lose that power and to lose that majority. And so that's why things are ratcheting up the way they have been.
They're like, oh no, they're
Like
gonna
I
do to
think it's,
us what we did to them.
yeah, like clinging on to this power, and like I just find that all so fascinating because I'm like, well, I don't think it's going to work. And also like it's not a healthy way to run a democracy, right?
Hmm.
Like so yeah, I don't know. I think I just have to be careful sometimes when I'm talking about like from an Irish point of view because we have such a funny like mixed up relationship to kind of colonialism, immigration,
Yeah.
Britishness.
It's a
It's
unique
kind of a tricky
experience
one.
because,
But I'm so
yeah.
fun at parties. Give me 2 drinks and I can really tell you a story about it.
You brought about the changing dynamics. One of the founding fathers in the U.S., and I think it might have been Thomas Paine or might have been Jefferson or some Hamilton or somebody. But they wrote the good thing about America is there's so many minorities that like no one could become a majority because between the religion and races and ethnicities and all that no one could dominate in a way to push it on the others. And it was in the context of religion, they're putting it mostly, but they're like just a myriad of religions, so no one can really dominate the other. Well, in reality, Protestants were dominating, but it did help push back anyone from becoming too dominant a source. And I think that's the power. It's just so many different groups here avoids one from dominating too much. And obviously they did, but in certain parts. But it does help having a heterogeneous population. I mean, it causes a lot of problems too because people always don't understand each other's cultures and stuff. But I think in the long run, our success here has been the ability to bring so many different people and get them to do commerce together to calm them down, and so rising tide lifts all boats. So it helped everyone succeed, and there's going to be skirmishes and stuff, but the goal is to just kind of make it better over time.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, and that's why it would be devastating to, if like the current administration gets their way where they want to reduce all immigration by 50% or something. Like, I really don't think we have this aging population. Mm-hmm. There's lots of reasons to welcome immigrants. And this is another area where I sometimes get caught up because I start talking about like how good immigrants are and like how we deserve to be here and stuff. Whereas I try and remember always that, like, because you hear, when the French won the World Cup last year, their team was made up largely of immigrants, right? Like, or children of immigrants. I think like 12 of the players were either born somewhere in a country other than France or had parents from like the Middle East and from Africa. And so the French and lots by CNN and everything had these headlines that was like, it's a win for immigration. And, look at France winning the World Cup because of immigrants. But I really flinched at that because I kind of thought, oh my God, but they're elite athletes. Like those men are like so exceptional. They're so to say like, it's just one little step away from saying, yeah, you're allowed in if you can like win us a trophy. Or, you always hear people say like Steve Jobs' dad was Syrian, and it's like, yeah, but even if any Syrian man then should be allowed in. Like it's not fair to say like if you can provide us with this, this, and this. Like that's my opinion.
That example, like nobody knew Steve Jobs when the dad came, that his real father, his birth father, that his son was going to be this like iconic person that's going to change the nature of technology in the world. Right. So you can't really judge this stuff. But again, that hardship that immigrants endure, and his hardship probably has something to do with the difficulties of immigrating to the U.S. and being a child immigrant that they put him up for adoption. But that hardship really pushes people to work at a higher level because they have to, and that's where like the great changes in society happen. Is people have to overcome adversity to make it. The immigrant experience is all about adversity and overcoming it to make it. So it's a treasure that we have here. People want to come here. And my last podcast, I'm not sure if it's one I put out or not, but like when you look at like East Asian countries that are not welcoming immigrants, and China where the one child policy like decimated their demographics. So as you said, there's like who's going to be supporting the up and coming like economy that's happening, or Japan, which is super restrictive on people coming in and dual citizenship and all that. Right. Like they have all these old people that no one take care, and as crazy as their technology and robots and all this stuff are, I mean they can't make up for the lack of young people that are like new minds that are coming in to do that. So it's self-destructive. If in the U.S. everyone had 3 to 5 kids, we could balance out the demographic changes. But they have stats like Americans aren't having kids. If they are, they're having not enough to keep the population sustainable. So it's going to go negative. And the only thing that we're doing is immigration is making up for it. So I think it's like even when you look at a tactical method, it's great for our country because it helps us keep a fresh population that's growing. It's a really complicated issue. And so because it's complicated and so emotional and personal. It's hard having an intelligent discussion about it in a day. It's just going to go by gut feelings of people. Yeah.
I know, because like even when I hear you saying, and like am I right? You're the son of immigrants, is that right?
Yeah,
Or
my
did I
parents
make that
immigrated
up?
here. No, it's correct.
Yeah, like and I know the stats are like immigrants are more likely to be entrepreneurs. Immigrants like actually work longer hours, and immigrants are less likely to commit crime than people that are born here. Like the stats bear out like what you're saying, and I think that a lot of like first generation kids like see that in their parents, and that's just to add another complicated layer, like that's hard too, because it's like that feeling that you should be working all the time, or that like you have to be the best at whatever it is you're doing to kind of like repay or like live up to your parents'
that
big
guilt
sacrifices they've made and stuff. Yeah, like that's a very real thing. And I think when I was doing the podcast, and it's funny, a lot of comics that I know are first generation kids, and I say kids, these are like grown up now, but but yeah, like I think that it can be sometimes you have to kind of unlearn that a little bit and be like, wait, like for your own like mental health and sanity, it's like you can also take it easy, and you should be allowed to just have a regular human experience rather than being expected to be like superhuman because of your immigration status or something, But yeah, lots of comics seem to be immigrants or kids of immigrants, and I think that's because when you're born into that world, first of all, you have like your foot in two worlds a lot of the time, especially if your folks like speak a different language at home, and then you have access to the kind of American upbringing in school, and it just makes people that more like, I don't know, like more able to see other perspectives, and it makes people more observant, I think. And it's interesting to me that a lot of comics and artists that I know have that experience,
Yeah, no, definitely. Because you notice the two cultures, and it stands out. And comedy especially, it's all about paying attention and noticing little differences that you could, bring out and show people.
Yeah.
Now you're in Brooklyn, and I think you said you do a regular show there. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, every Monday I do a show with two of my friends, Joe Firestone and Aparna Nancherla. And it's just like, it's a comedy show. So we just kind of mess around on stage, and then we bring up different comedians. And so that's kind of like my only regular thing that I do. And that's every Monday.
And do you have an ongoing podcast right now? I know the Maeve in America podcast hasn't been continued, but it's still there to listen to. But what current podcasts are you doing that's active?
Oh, yeah. So now I'm working on a climate justice podcast. I know, another fun, very easy issue to get your head around. Yeah, it's a climate justice podcast, and it's called Mothers of Invention. And that's basically, I just meet and talk to like women who are working for climate justice and against climate change. And actually, that's a lot of immigration stuff too. Because of course, especially in the future, there's going to be massive movements of people because of climate change. So that's like it's cool to kind of learn more about that, and also frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's keeping me busy day to day. And then I also obviously write. I write for the Progressive, and I write for the New York Times.
Awesome. They keep you so busy. And what's the best way for people to contact you and to follow you?
Well, I'm just obsessed with Instagram. I'm Maeve in America on Instagram, or else just Maeve Higgins on Twitter. Yeah, so.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I always enjoy talking with you. Very creative. When you talk creative people, it's always fun because it's something interesting, new you learn, and especially when someone's a comedian, you laugh with it too. So laughing is always good, especially in talking about these kind of topics. So like climate change and immigration and asylum. It's like, oh boy, we need some laughs here.
I know. But John, thank you, and thanks for your work, and thanks to all of your colleagues for their work too. It's such a great thing that you do.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Maeve. I wish you the best, and I'll be in touch.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.